Good evening. This meeting is now live and being broadcast and recorded. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Mayor of the Borough of Bracknell Forest, Councillor Nahida Jazz.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting. I am waiving the requirement in the council procedure rule requiring councillors to stand when addressing the meeting, so please remain seated. The meeting is being broadcast and recorded. If there are any technical issues, please bear with us. I now declare the meeting open. Are there any apologies for the absence?
Madam Mayor, I've received apologies from councillors Jeffries and Neal. I also understand we do have two councillors that are en route who will be arriving late. That's Councillor McLean and Councillor Robertson.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have any other apologies? Please raise your hand and I will come to you in turn. Yes, please.
Councillor Mossam.
Yes, Councillor Mossam, please.
Yeah, the apologies are for Councillor Mossam.
Oh, okay, sorry. Apologies for Councillor Moss.
Thank you for that. I actually see Councillor Mossam online, so I think he's managed to make it, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. So, Chief Executive Officer, is there anyone joining us remotely?
Yes, councillors joining remotely, please could you turn on your microphone and state that you're present when I call your name. Anyone who does not respond will be recorded as giving their apologies. Councillor Mossam.
Yeah.
Councillor Mackenzie Boyle.
Present.
And that's it, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors joining remotely, please turn on your... So we'll go to agenda item 2. It is recommended for approval as a correct record in the minutes of the council meeting held on 29th of November 2023. I am happy to move the approval of the minutes. Before I ask Councillor Templeton to second the motion, please indicate if you have an issue with the accuracy. No? Thank you. Deputy Mayor, has anyone joining remotely indicated that there is an issue?
No.
Thank you. Councillor Templeton, are you happy to second the minutes as a correct record?
I second the minutes as a correct record.
Thank you very much. Councillor Templeton, has anybody had indicated that they have an issue with those agreed minutes? Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Councillor Templeton. As nobody has indicated that they have an issue, those are agreed. Sorry. Agenda item 3, declaration of interest. The full text of declaration of interest is set out on the agenda papers at item 3. Does any councillor have a disclosable pecuniary interest or an affected interest to declare? Please also declare the nature of the interest. Yes, Councillor Split.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to declare an affected interest in relation to agenda item 7, the council's participation in the safety valve scheme, as my wife is employed as a teacher at a borough school.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
No one online.
Deputy Mayor, has anyone joining remotely indicated that they have an interest?
No.
Thank you. We have come to agenda item 4, which are Mayor's announcement. I have no such announcement, but I will give a brief account of my activities which I have undertaken on everybody's behalf. And what a pleasure it has been to go into the community and various events. You can see in the pictures there. We have a wonderful resource. It's Pinewood Gymnastics, and some of our youngsters, which you see in those pictures, they have actually won national and international gold medals, and I was ever so proud to join them. The second pleasure point was when I attended the Bracknell Primary School's choir here in Bond Street. It was such a delight, and those little souls, they sang their heart out and warmed us all up on a very cold evening. Also, we attended the Sleeping Beauty at South Hill Park, which was, again, another joy and just to cheer us up in this festive season. There are a few slides. Home Start, what a wonderful show they put up. Highlight of my mayoralty was sending an invite to local primary schools to design the mayor's Christmas card. Hundreds of entries were received, many schools participated, and 3 lucky winners were selected. Young lady whose design won, you have all seen that card, it was selected, and then I went and I met her and I gave her her gift voucher. And same was done for the 2 runners-up. I am so happy to say that St. Joseph School children received me very well, and they sang the Christmas carols, which was highlight of my day. Other than that, there was Bracknell choir practice at Newbold College. That was another pleasure, just to warm our hearts. And I am so pleased and so humbled and so privileged to be living in such a vibrant community where we all come together in all seasons, in all faiths, and we share in each other's joys. Thank you very much. We have come to the report of the executive at the agenda item 5 on page 17. Would Councillor Templeton like to present the executive report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think there's going to be some slides come up, are there? There's only been one executive meeting since November. That's on the 12th of December. The finance and business change, the capital programme 2024-25, 26-27 and revenue budget 24-25. The executive agreed to consult on the draft capital programme based on 8.328 million of new spending. The executive also agreed to consult on the draft revenue budget proposals for 2024-25. This totals 103.429 million. Somebody's got their microphone on. The executive approved writing off 54,150 for a commercial property debt that was no longer recoverable. That's a very unusual event. The draft revenue budget and capital programme will now be considered by overview and scrutiny. Their views will be reported back to the executive and full council in February, alongside feedback from residents, local groups and businesses. The final 24-25 budget will be agreed in February. Finance and business change, building maintenance and repair service contract. The executive approved the procurement plan for an organisation to provide 24-hour maintenance reactive repairs for the council's corporate buildings and buyback schools. The current contract has been in place since February 2020. The contract was based on a fixed price for 3 years, with the option to extend for a further 2 years. In February 2023, the council granted a 1-year extension to the current contractor. Based on the current provider's performance, the council would extend the contract for a further year, meaning the contract would expire on the 1st of February 2025. Finance and business change, procurement of neutral agency, vendor, specialist providers of agency staff. The executive approved the re-procurement of a neutral vendor contract to provide the council with agency staff in accordance with the strategic procurement plan. The council spends more than 7 million a year on agency staff. Procurement will be split into 3 lots to address the current issues with recruiting specialist social care and education roles under a neutral agency vendor agreement. This approach should reduce the overall costs to the council. Planning and transport. making or adoption of the Winkfield Neighbourhood Plan 2022-2037. The Executive agreed the formal making of the Winkfield Neighbourhood Development Plan. This will form part of the statutory Bracknell Forest Development Plan. The Council, as the local planning authority, has a statutory duty to make a neighbourhood development plan if more than half of those voting at a referendum vote in favour of making the neighbourhood development plan. The referendum was held on Thursday the 23rd, 2023, with a total of 1,245 votes being cast. Children, young people and learning. Personal budgets policy. The Executive approved the revised personal budgets policy and agreed to publish and implement it in December 2023. In accordance with the SEND Code of Practice, January 2015, local authorities must provide information on personal budgets as part of the local offer. Culture delivery and public protection. Bracknell Forest Serious Violence Strategy. The Executive endorsed the Bracknell Forest Serious Violence Strategy 2024 to 27. It agreed that the more detailed action plan should be compiled, which will be reviewed and approved by the Executive Director and the Executive Member for Culture Delivery and Public Protection. The Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 introduced a serious violence duty on specified authorities within a local government area. As part of the duty, a strategy was required to be prepared, publicised and implemented. The Serious Violence and Exploitation Strategy subgroup of the Community Safety Partnership will now work within the recommendations in the strategy to develop an action plan. Adult Social Services, Health and Housing. Community Support Winter Update. The Executive endorsed the updated Financial Hardship Action Plan and agreed the Contain Outbreak Management Fund, COMF, spending plan. In 2022, the Council recognised the need for a strategic, sustainable and preventative approach to supporting residents who may be at risk of or experiencing financial hardship. There continues to be a lasting impact from the pandemic on health and well-being for communities across our borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tempton. Does any councillor have any question for Councillor Tempton? No? Deputy Mayor, people joining remotely, do they have any questions? No. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Tempton. The recommendation is for Council to note the report so we can consider it noted. We have now come to item 6, the polling district and polling place review 2024 on page 23 of the agenda. Does any councillor have a question of Councillor Templeton? No? Thank you very much. Any councillor joining remotely have any questions?
Nothing online.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, Councillor Templeton, would you like to move the recommendations?
I will move the recommendations.
Is that seconded?
Madam Mayor, Councillor Gilby, I will second.
Thank you. Now we will move to the debate. Please raise your hands if you wish to speak. You may speak once during the debate for no longer than 5 minutes. Councillors in the room will be invited to speak first. Councillor Templeton will have the right to reply at the end of the debate before we move to the vote. Councillor Templeton, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would just like to say I think it's clearly written in the whole of the recommendation. This has been out to consultation before. There was very few changes when it came to this final recommendation. Most of these were put in place last year. So I move it as it is, and I think it's clear, and there's been no changes really very much since it went out to consultation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Templeton. Councillor Gilby, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right to speak later in the debate?
I will speak now, Madam Mayor. I would simply observe and emphasise that a consultation was made on this, and I want to thank all the residents and councillors who submitted representations as part of this process. I can assure everyone listening in that each response was considered on its merits and was taken into account as part of this process. And I would also commend all the councillors that were involved in the steering group that represents a cross-party across the council who are involved in making this final recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any councillor wish to speak? Deputy Mayor, people joining remotely, does any councillor?
Nobody? No.
Thank you. So, Councillor Templeton, you have a right to reply. Would you like to reply?
I just ask that the recommendation be put for vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could Lizzie cue the recommendations? Yeah, thank you. The recommendation is set out on screen. The Democratic Services Officer will count our votes. Please make sure your hand is clearly raised. Only those in the room can vote. Can all those present in the chamber indicate by raising your hand if you support the recommendation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is set out on screen. Sorry, beg your pardon. Thank you. That is carried. Is it noted? We have come to the report on Bracknell Forest Council's participation in the DFE's Safety Valve intervention program at agenda item 7. I would like to remind all councillors that if anyone wishes to discuss the confidential annex from the pages 93 to 134 of the agenda, we will need to move into closed session. If anyone wishes to discuss this annex, we will move this agenda item to the end of the meeting. Does any councillor wish to discuss the content of the confidential annex? Deputy Mayor, people joining remotely, does anybody want to discuss any of the agenda items, confidential agenda items?
No.
Thank you. Does any councillor have a question of the leader? Deputy Mayor, are there any questions from those joining remotely?
No.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, Councillor Templeton, would you like to move the recommendation, please?
I would like to move the recommendations at 212 to 23 on page 85 of the agenda.
Madam Mayor, that's seconded.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Barnard, that's seconded.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barnard. Now we will move to the debate. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. You may speak once during the debate for no longer than 5 minutes. Councillors in the room will be invited to speak first. Councillor Templeton will have the right to reply at the end of the debate before we move to the vote. Councillor Templeton, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm moving this because it's so very important for the whole council. I know securing the best possible education for Bracknell's Forest children and young people is an issue that all members of this council feel strongly about. And I thank Councillor Gareth Barnard for seconding this motion. Improving our services for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities is especially urgent. The level of spend on education for our pupils with special educational needs and disabilities has almost doubled in the last 5 years. We are spending more than £7 million more on placements outside the borough and providing almost £4 million more in top-up funding for our local mainstream schools and special resource provision than in 2018-19. We had spent £15 million more than the funding available to us by the end of 22-23, and the current year's position looks like an overspend of at least £8 million. There can be no doubt that this is one of the most challenging financial issues that this council has ever faced. And the reason is that we do not have sufficient places in Bracknell Forest to support children whose needs cannot be met in mainstream schools. We have the excellent Kennel Lane and special resource positions in a number of primary schools, but the level of need is beyond our capacity, particularly at secondary school. To reduce our costs, we therefore have to build more local provision. The new special educational places proposed are at Sandhurst Secondary School, Edgeborough Secondary School, and on the former Warfield All Saints Primary School site. The sooner these facilities can be open, the better. The sooner our children will not have to travel long distances, and the sooner the deficit costs will stop rising. The new school at Butlers Park has already been agreed by the Department for Education, but we need to ensure that this too is built as soon as possible. Because of the high deficit accrued, the Department of Education invited Bracknell Forest to join the Safety Valve programme. This programme is to enable a council to balance its annual budget as quickly as possible and to repay all the accrued deficit predicted to rise to 41 million within 5 years. This is a huge sum for a council of our size to meet. But if these proposals are accepted and a deal is agreed, the Department for Education will fund some of the accrued deficit. However, even with a significant contribution from the Department of Education, there will still be a need to contribute a large sum from the Council's reserve to ensure that the deficit is fully funded. 8 years ago, when this council was setting its budget for 2016-17, councillors would not have been in a position to commit to the level of reserves needed. There was not enough available. Now, however, because of the balances saved from 2018 and 19 business rate pilots, we can make the contributions needed. The proposal also includes funding from parts of the dedicated schools grant to support the high needs area, including top slicing a maximum of 0.5% from individual school budgets. A huge ask, considering the financial pressures being experienced by all schools. But following a consultation with all schools, the Schools Forum has agreed this. This is an unprecedented challenge for this council, but I urge you all to support the recommendations. The Department of Education is anxious that the details of the proposal remain confidential until all have been agreed. But it is right that these proposals are discussed in public, and I do not want the meeting to go into private session. For that reason, I ask that members restrict their comments to the public papers and not stray into the confidential papers, which include a lot of detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Temperton. Councillor Bernard, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right to speak later in the
Madam
debate?
Mayor, I'd like to reserve, thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any councillor wish to speak? Councillor Bailey?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. The invitation, or rather requirement, to participate in the government's Safety Valve programme has presented a huge challenge to the council, especially the officers leading this challenge, particularly given the short timescales involved. The consultation process with key stakeholders has been rigorous, open and transparent. It has involved school leaders, parent and carer representatives and school governors. There have been lengthy briefing sessions during which the details of the challenges faced were made explicit. It is fair to say that despite the acknowledged reservations from those stakeholders, they have cooperated fully, not least in the co-production of our response. On behalf of the officers, I'd like to thank the head teachers and governors for their time and expertise and the many workshops to explore all areas of spending funded from the high needs block. They helped identify the services that offer most value and should be protected, and other areas where spending could be reduced with no significant impact. They also gave their thoughts on the type and scale of the new local provision that can best fill the current gaps and where that could potentially be located. The proposals that have been developed for submission have therefore been shaped by representatives from our schools, parents and carers, the people who best know our children and young people. This deliberately collaborative approach has undoubtedly led to stronger relationships being developed across our local school system. This will serve us well as we move into the delivery phase of these plans. While the Council holds overall responsibility and will lead on key elements, we cannot achieve the scale of change needed to secure a sustainable high-needs system alone. Perhaps the most visible sign of this strengthened relationship and the trust it has created can be seen in response of the consultation on the proposed block transfer. This is a proposal to take funding from other parts of the dedicated schools grant to support high needs area, including top slicing a maximum of 0.5% from individual school budgets. With school budgets under similar pressure to the council's budget, it was never going to be an easy thing for schools to accept. However, our officers and advisors viewed it as a critical part of returning to a balanced position over the next 5 years, and so it was put to schools as a proposal for their consideration. The fact that 21 out of the 23 responses to the consultation accepted this, despite knowing that it would affect their funding, can be seen as a real vote of confidence, both in the engaging approach we have taken to safety valve and the strength of our overall proposals. Once again, I would like to pay tribute to all the head teachers and governors who participated in this very difficult exercise. They were open, honest and constructive throughout. Without their engagement, our participation in Safety Valve would have not been possible. It will, of course, require considerable effort to deliver our plans, and we will need to invest in the resources to ensure we are successful. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Does any other councillor wish to... Yes, Councillor McLean? Sorry, Councillor Smith, sorry, beg your pardon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A safety valve sounds like a positive thing. I'm an engineer by trade, and in my field, a safety valve exists to relieve excess pressure, to protect the system as a whole from catastrophic failure when things go wrong. But it is clear that a safety valve, in the eyes of this current government, has very little to do with protecting schools, local authorities, or most importantly, SEND pupils from the significant financial pressures we are currently facing. This decision regarding our participation in Safety Valve is almost certainly the most significant the majority of us have had to participate in to date. The changes we're being asked to approve have major implications, not just with respect to the Council's own finances, with substantial contributions being required from our reserves, but also directly impacting our schools and SEND provision. With this at the forefront of our minds, it is critical that all of us and the residents we represent understand exactly what is put before us today. The Children and Families Act 2014 and the SEND Regulations 2014 clearly set out the obligations on local authorities to provide for the individual needs of SEND pupils. The demand for such provision has been rising dramatically in recent years, not just in Bracknell Forest, but universally up and down the country. The reasons for this are nuanced and complex, but the consequences are singular. We have substantially more pupils of EHCPs in the borough now than we did just a few years ago, and our expenditure on SEND provision has risen proportionally. Over the same period, central government funding for the high needs block provided to local authorities has failed to keep pace. As a consequence, there is a growing shortfall. Central government has no coherent plan to address this increasing need or the associated funding gap. Their solution over recent years has been to permit local authorities like Bracknell Forest to run a deficit in our high needs block budgets. However, this has always been only a temporary fix and not a sustainable long-term solution. As a consequence of this policy and the failure of central government to adequately fund the high needs block, Bracknell Forest, much like many other councils, has a sizable debt accrued to the DFE, a debt they are now telling us has come due. It is imperative to recognise that this is not, in large part, a debt accrued as a consequence of local failures or poor management by this council. Whilst this council's historical record on SEND provision is not without blemish, the challenges we are facing are fundamentally the same as those affecting a very significant number of other local authorities up and down the country. It is therefore, primarily, a debt which has been engineered by chronic central government underfunding of the high needs block. This debt is now being leveraged by the DFE to strong-arm local authorities into finding aggressive and potentially very damaging cuts within our schools' budgets and to pilfer from our vital reserves at a time we have never been more financially vulnerable. Spun as central government would like us to see it, Safety Valve is a generous offer by the DfE to write off a portion of our accrued debt, provided we make the changes to eliminate our high needs block deficit. But we should not be fooled. It's not a safety valve, it's a hold-up. If we accept, Safety Valve demands that we resolve our growing high needs block deficit within 5 years, whilst doing nothing to address the fundamental causes. Specifically, we are expected to manage demand and find ways of reducing SEND expenditure, whilst also diverting funding from the schools block, which is that proportion of the dedicated schools grant intended for general educational provision, to make up shortfalls in the high needs block funding. We need to be very clear, in terms of year-on-year funding, there is no additional compensation being offered. Demand for SEND provision will almost certainly continue to grow, and we will remain obligated to meet it, but with a further reduced high needs block budget, with schools across the borough plugging that gap from their already overstretched general funds. This is, in effect, a budget cut to our schools. The figures involved are substantial, and with an order of magnitude, I fear, may well require schools to reduce staffing or make other significant compromises. In return for achieving this, the DfE makes some contribution to the outstanding debt, though the Council is still expected to relinquish a significant quantity of our financial reserves. This is a deal which is unfair to residents, it's unfair to schools, and it's particularly unfair to SEND pupils. Unfortunately, the only scenario worse than accepting Safety Valve is not accepting Safety Valve. Refuse and the government will almost certainly force us to balance the deficit even faster and without the DfE making any contribution to the accrued high needs block debt. So here we are, faced with the poison chalice of an offer which continues to ask us and our schools to deliver ever more for ever less. It's nothing more than a dirty deal begrudgingly accepted under duress. I will reticently be voting to accept the proposals on this basis, but I do so with a heavy and furious heart. My only hope is that as local families feel the burden of this over the years to come, they don't forget who the true culprits are, and perhaps that they might remember as much when time comes to evict this broken government at the ballot box later this year.
Thank you very much. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Allen? Councillor Allen?
Thank you. I'm just going to make a very brief comment that Mary mentioned the fact that we're having to use a significant amount of reserves. And as she pointed out, we'd actually been growing our reserves a little since 2016, putting away business rates, etc. I'd like to point out that actually we were pressured in the past to spend our reserves, and people were complaining that we had too much reserves. And I would have to say that I'm glad that we didn't give in to that pressure, because without these reserves, this Safety Valve programme would be an absolute non-starter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Watts. Speaking as an ex-SEN educator and a current parent of SEN children, I can tell you personally that without the right setting, the damage to SEN children's education, social skills, and not to mention confidence, can be detrimental and long-lasting. We need more training, we need more staff for our schools, we need more equipment and support overall to meet the various needs of our SEN children. So the money that we need, we'll get it by any means necessary, so I support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Deputy Mayor, are there any requests to speak from those joining remotely?
No hands online.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bernard to speak if he hasn't already spoken, so.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'm pleased to second this motion because it really does set out the commitment that this council has to move forward with addressing issues with SEN. I was the executive member up to the time of the last election and recognise over that time, both through the Ofsted report of issues with SEND in Bracknell Forest and more, that there was a huge amount to do. And before I make my substantive comments, I would like to thank all our officers, our governors, our head teachers, school leaders, SEN coordinators and all those for their involvement in this, because actually, together with the parents and the children, they're the people that will drive this forward. And I think the important thing to say is we could sit here and we could debate whether we need more money from central government, or we could really show here in this council chamber the clear political leadership that will actually help improve services. Yes, there are concerns about funding and sustainability with the SEN, but equally there's significant issues in Bracknell Forest and elsewhere about early intervention. I get concerned when we talk about the need for EHCP plans, when really what we should be doing is tackling and addressing these issues early on. Well, what I've heard in the safety valve, yes, is the fact that we have to use some of our reserves, and my understanding is that actually this puts us in a strong position with a clear negotiation with DFE to move this forward. But let's think about what's actually going to happen. Things that really I'm so passionate and so pleased to see will be coming forward. You know, the units at Sandhurst, Edgebarrow, the use of the Warfield CAV School, All Saints site, the Bucklers Park School, and potentially more in the future. This will actually mean we can provide that support to our children locally. And Councillor Smith, you know, a passionate rant that you put forward there is fine, but actually all of those things that are absolutely key to this plan will deliver local places for local children, will improve the quality of support locally. Now, there are risks, and Councillor Bailey, you alluded to them, the delivery phase. I'm still not confident, based on what parents and school leaders say to me, that where we want to be, but I know there are plans in place to continue the improvement. And really what I think my plea today would be is, let us make sure that when we interact with our schools, we do it in a timely manner, that we can get in there early on, that we can use the safety valve programme and the resources that are coming forward to make sure that we can meet the needs of children, both in specialist provision, but also in mainstream, so that we don't actually need an EHC plan. Because the thing that frustrates me is a plan is only a piece of paper. What we want to make sure is that our children have access to local provision in the area, and this is what this plan will give. There is a bigger debate to be had about government funding of all colours, and I've known this for many, many years because of my involvement in this, for SEN and for other areas. But the best way to get money out of governments of any political colour is to demonstrate that you have the credibility and the ability to spend and use the resources that you've got in the best interest and do what's needed. And sadly, we've not always been great in Bracknell Forest. I was pretty open about that in the years in the past. So I look forward to supporting the motion this evening. But there are two things. First of all, Councillor Mrs Templeton and Councillor Bailey, it's for the administration to deliver on this. We will support this programme. We will also hold you to account for this, because there are risks inherent in this. There are risks around the delivery of the unit, but there's also transactional risks day in, day out. Communication with parents, communications with schools, the ability to make these things happen at an early stage. Because the best way that we can reassure and support our families is just to get the basics right. Not 6 weeks to wait to have some feedback, not schools waiting to be paid for outstanding bills. Not schools waiting to understand what early stage provision there is. I fully support this. I absolutely believe that this administration has the commitment and the desire to take this forward, to show that political leadership, to deliver on this. We will support, but at the same time we'll hold to account. But frankly, Councillor Smith, I think your speech this evening takes away from the huge amount of important work that goes on, because fundamentally, and number one, this is about delivering for our children. It's getting that provision in place. It's making sure it happens, and I will support the administration in doing this, whilst at the time making sure it happens in a timely manner. And I look forward to the Council supporting this unanimously this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bernard. Councillor Templeton, would you like to reply?
I would. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Barnard. I think we've actually inherited some of the history of the way in dealing with the problems with communication, and that has to be changed. And I agree that everybody wants it changed, so we have better communication with our parents, and we listen to them, and we are doing so. I believe our aim as a council should be to deliver sustainable long-term financial plans through which we can continue to support the needs of our most vulnerable residents, that we provide appropriate local places for local children. I also believe that the proposals before us this evening will help us do that. Having listened to all the contributions, I am confident that everyone here will do so too, and that you will all support this recommendation. I move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Templeton. The recommendation is set out on the screen. The Democratic Services Officer will count our votes, so please make sure your hand is clearly raised. Only those in the room can vote. Can all those present in the chamber indicate by raising your hand if you support the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe that's unanimous.
Thank you very much. That is carried. Sharing slides for question 8 now. Question item 8. The next item on the agenda is questions. Received under the Public Protection Scheme, we have received notice of a question submitted which is set out at the item 8 at the beginning of your agenda and will be displayed on the screen. The response from the executive member have been published as a supplementary to the agenda. Both the question and the response will be taken as read. The questioner will have the opportunity to ask one supplementary question which should arise directly from the question or the reply provided and be second. Can I confirm that Dr. Michael Brown, the resident who has submitted the question, has joined the meeting remotely?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. So,
Would you like me to ask my supplemental question?
not at this time, no. Okay. The question is from Dr. Michael Brown to Councillor Gilby, Executive Member for Planning and Transport. The response from Councillor Gilby has been published and is shown on the screen. Dr. Brown, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Gilby?
Yes, I do. Given that this whole process has gone on for many years, what will be the next steps if the Polo Club do not complete the groundworks within the time frame expected now?
Thank you. Councillor Gilby, can you please respond?
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I'd like to firstly start by emphasising that I can understand your frustration and indeed the frustration of all ramblers and users. I myself am an avid rambler. I leave you to decide which type of rambler that is. But nevertheless, I do understand the frustration. I've heard it from many users and residents. In answer to your question, we're at that stage now where we're in active dialogue with the Polo Club. But you obviously ask what would be the remedies available to us if our current intentions do not pan out. I should always emphasise that the council retains, as a last resort, legal remedies that we can pursue with the Polo Club if necessary to ensure that this reaches a satisfactory conclusion. As you might understand, this is an option that we would be adverse to pursuing only as a last resort, because it is important that we have that ongoing relationship with the Polo Club. But please be assured that if we have to reach that stage, then we will certainly be very considered and, if necessary, very deliberate in the methods that we would apply. I should also emphasise that I remain in conversation with the chair of the Local Countryside Access Forum, who has raised this issue with me on numerous occasions, and I will remain in conversation with him as developments occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilby. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Brown. Please, can you leave the Teams call?
Sure.
You can continue to watch the meeting via YouTube if you wish. Thank you. Have they left? Okay, thank you. We have received notice of 2 questions from the councillors, which are set out at item 9 at the beginning of your agenda and will be displayed on the screen in turn. The response from the relevant executive member to each question has been published. As a supplementary to the agenda, both questions and the responses will be taken as read. The first question is from Councillor McLean to Councillor Wright, Executive Member for Adult Services, Health and Housing. The response from Councillor Wright has been published and is shown on the screen. Councillor McLean, do you want to ask a supplementary question of Councillor Wright, please?
Councillor McLean, thank you, Madam Mayor, and apologies for my tardy arrival this evening. It just proves that South Western Railway is wholly reliable for being unreliable. So apologies for that. But my supplementary question this evening is that there is a lot of misinformation on social media about the delivery of the housing numbers that Bracknell Forest has achieved since 2017. Does the executive member join me in condemning this propagation of disinformation as it's detrimental to the work of the council in supporting our residents?
Councillor Wright, can you please respond?
Okay, I'd like to thank the councillor for the question. I'm not aware of such comments on social media, but I will look into it and I'll make sure that the record is corrected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our second question set out at item 9 at the beginning of your agenda and on the screen. This has been asked by the Councillor Gove to Councillor Bailey, Executive Member for Children, Young People and Learning. The response from Councillor Bailey has been published and is shown on the screen. Councillor Gove, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Bailey, please?
Yes, I do, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you for the answer to the question, Councillor Bailey. This topic and others relating to it are very relevant to all members in all of the borough wards. It scratches the surface of a number of questions related to the children, young people and learning portfolio. In the interest of good practice and transparency, will you ensure that there are opportunities for members to receive regular information on key aspects relating to children, young people and learning, and additionally the opportunity to scrutinise the information whilst ensuring that the protocols of check and balance are employed? Currently there is no such opportunity in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gove. Councillor Bailey, can you please respond?
Yes, I can, and thank you for the question. I absolutely support what you've just said. I'm finding that it's important that we keep parents, carers updated and make sure we operate and act swiftly all the time. We've not been good at that in the past, but I fully take on board what you've said and I undertake to commit to that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have received one motion submitted under Council Procedure Rule 11 of the Constitution, which is set out at item 10 at the beginning of your agenda. The motion will be moved and seconded, and then we will move into debate. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. You will be able to speak once for no longer than 5 minutes. Councillors in the room will be invited to speak first. The mover of the motion will have the right to reply before the vote is taken. If an amendment is moved and seconded, the debate will begin on the amendment. Anyone who has already spoken on the substantive motion can speak again on the amendment. The mover of the substantive motion will have the right to reply at the end of the debate on the amendment before the vote is taken. Councillor McLean, would you like to propose your motion, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I, like many members of this council, have had to deal with residents' concerns, complaints and inconvenience generated by congestion caused by the roads being dug up in the borough. This is something we all have to get used to because we all want to benefit from the improvements that the utility companies bring to local services. Of particular recent note have been the fibre optic works that have run across the borough and generated significant inconvenience for many residents and businesses. I've always told my residents that we have to accept that this work needs to be done, but it needs to be done in a thoughtful, managed and neighbourly way, because far too often my residents have made the perfectly valid point that actually a lot of the work that is meant to be being carried out across the borough isn't being done, but the roadworks or traffic lights or anything else are still in place. And certainly at weekends we see roadworks left obstructing the highway when no work is being carried out. So the purpose of this motion this evening is to accept that roadworks are a factor of life, but we want to do it in a way working in partnership with utility providers that minimise the inconvenience to residents and local businesses. And where companies, for whatever reason, fall foul of our permit scheme, the sanctions the council should impose on those should be significant and severe, as befits the amount of inconvenience they cause our residents. So I'm hoping that this motion will be accepted by the council as a constructive and positive way of working with our local MPs and the utility providers to get the best outcomes for local residents. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Councillor Bernard, do you second the motion?
Happy to second the motion. Yeah, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McLean, would you like to speak to the motion? Oh, he did. Councillor Bernard, do you wish to speak or reserve?
I'm happy to reserve, but I believe that there's some more process to go through at this point, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any councillor wish to speak? Councillor Gilby?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to propose an amendment to the motion, of which should have been received earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilby. Councillor Watts?
No, I'm on. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to say that the roadworks have been causing a lot of delays with...
Can I just say I'm happy to second that amendment if that helps as well,
yes,
as we both accept that the amendment is an acceptable way of amending the motion.
There you go.
Okay. Yes,
Sorry.
I agree to that, and sorry about this little slip here. So,
Madam Mayor, just for public record, I'm perfectly happy to accept Councillor Gilby's amendment to the motion. Thank you.
thank you very much for that. So now we are going to debate that motion. Does any councillor wish to speak? Councillor Ward, sorry, now. Yes, please.
No worries, we got there. Thank you. I just wanted to say that the roadworks have been affecting the bus routes, and if you are like me, you're a bus ride the bus and you rely on the app doesn't update because it doesn't know about the roadworks. And my son and I were stuck for about half an hour waiting for a bus that never showed up. And then somebody else who knew about the roadworks came and told me, and if my friend hadn't mentioned, we would have been there for goodness knows how long. And we have since been having to walk home in the cold every day from school, and it's a real pain. So, yeah, we need collaboration, and the council needs more power over these roadworks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watts. Councillor McLean and Councillor Bernard, are you minded to accept this revised wording into your motion?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I think we've indicated that, but yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Confirming that for the record.
Thank you. This now becomes the substantive motion, and we will move to the normal rules of debate. Are there any further amendments? No? Thank you. The revised motion is set out on the screen. Does any councillor wish to speak? Councillors in the room will be invited to speak first. Debate in normal way. It doesn't say. Anyway, we will debate in the normal way. Councillor Gilby, yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I have a chance maybe to speak to this amendment, I want to commend Councillors McLean and originally Mackenzie Boyle, now Councillor Barnard, for moving the original motion. I suspect if we were to go round this chamber and ask each council individually to talk about the correspondence they'd received about roadworks in their area, I'm sure everyone will have something to say. They are quite clearly the bane of our lives, really, when it comes to this sort of thing. We all experience it. It's not just our residents, it's all of us personally. the purpose behind this amendment is clearly to strengthen the context behind it, but also to specify the powers that we would ideally like to receive from central government. As Councillor McLean rightly pointed out, although road maintenance is directly the purview of the council, most of these roadworks are really down to other providers like gas, electricity, water and telecommunications. And whilst they serve an important role, and I commend Councillor McLean for putting out the positive message that these things quite clearly are a benefit in the long run, it is the case that we as a council do have insufficient ability to be able to control corral, to be able to step in when needed to ensure that the roadworks serve the best interest of residents. This motion, I hope, will end up being a very strong indictment from the council to central government to say that councils like ours should be imbued with better powers to be able to serve the interests of our residents, to get that greater control, and I therefore commend this amendment and the intent of the original motion. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, are there any requests to speak from those joining remotely? No. Councillor Bernard, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this is a very timely motion, and I thank the comments from Councillor Gilby, because it seemed to me in the months in the run-up to last Christmas that there was sort of one of these sort of games, whichever way you turned, you found a new set of roadworks. And I think the fundamental issue that came to light, and by the way, I do want to do a shout out for Wayne Scott, one of our illustrious officers, because I met Wayne Scott at various points around Whitegrove, basically literally at all hours of the day and night, and including on one somewhat amusing incident where a local resident contacted me late at night to say the traffic lights weren't working. So it showed up on his dash cam, and his dash cam showed the guys that had actually nicked them the following day. So think things move there. But the serious point is that what frustrates, I think, our residents the most is that, yes, we understand, as Councillor McLean has said, the need for utility work. We also understand the need for work associated with new housing, whether wanted or not by local residents. But what we don't accept and understand is sometimes the chaotic, shoddy signage, the lack of properly put in place licences, the subcontractors to the subcontractors. And this is the stuff that really, really upsets people. When you're there at 8, 9 o'clock at night, and all 4 traffic lights on four-way control are red, or all 4 are green, or all 4 are just not working, or in some cases had the batteries nicked, and then you end up out of office hours with all this going on. And what I think we should be given as a council is that we should really be given those powers to say it is unacceptable. And if I can go further, at the risk of sounding like another councillor that spoke earlier this evening, maybe go into a bit of a rant here, what I actually want to say is maybe we should be given the power to ban certain subcontractors for working in our local authority if they prove to be ineffective. You know, we hear about the fixed penalties that are handed out by our illustrious colleagues on the left here, which will speak to us later. But fundamentally, it's nothing to these contractors when they get a rap on the knuckles. You know, they might get £100, £150 or something like this, or maybe a little bit more. But the huge amount of work that our officers have to put in to get to that point, checking up on the licences, have things been signed in advance? And if they're not telling us what they're going to do in advertising, and I absolutely get the point, Councillor Watts, about the buses. How on earth are you going to have buses and public transport planned if one day you're actually driving there, or maybe driving a taxi with a youngster for Kennel Lane or something like that, to discover that there are traffic lights in the road there? And then comes the game of chicken, doesn't it? Everybody's sitting either side where the traffic lights are red. It's usually raining, it's usually dark. Who's going to go forward? Who isn't? Who can do this? Who can't? So I really hope that this will lead to stronger powers. But fundamentally, I think the issue rests not necessarily with the primary utility companies, for a change, but actually with the subcontractors they employ. And I think we need to send a very, very strong message that we're on the side of residents here. We want to make absolutely certain we can use the powers we can. Say a fundamentally good job. There are many others apart from Wayne, but Wayne is the one I had to work with a lot through the last year, and so has Councillor McLean. They do a fantastic job, but they need more legislative support, they need more government support, and they also, I think, need the ability here, as the administration has done with fly tipping, to put, I think, penalties which are consistent with what residents would expect to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bernard. Councillor McLean, do you wish to sum up?
Yes, all albeit briefly, as we have guests waiting
Thank
to
you.
speak. So my comments would be, this is a plea for utility companies and the subcontractors to behave in Bracknell Forest in an enabling way that our residents can feel is justifiable when the work needs to be done, but also a call for government to give us powers so that if the companies determine not to be neighbourly and not to take into account local factors, that we have the opportunity to impose punitive fines on them to demonstrate the seriousness of the inconvenience they're causing to our residents, because I think our residents need to know that we take it seriously. And as Councillor Ballard has said, we were very fortunate with Wayne Scott coming out at all hours in our ward. The Chief Executive was able to come to our ward and see firsthand the problems caused by the road use and the utility companies digging up the road. We're doing all we can. We want the support of the government, which of whatever colour, whoever runs the government centrally, to give us the powers to look after the best interests of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bernard. Sorry, Councillor McLean, beg your pardon. He is my favourite councillor in here. The motion is set out on screen for a vote. The Democratic Services Officer will count the votes of councillors in the room, so please make sure your hand is clearly raised. Only those in the rooms can vote. Please raise your hand if you support the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. That's unanimous again.
Thank you very much. That is carried. Before we move on to presentation from Thames Valley Police representative, we will like to take a 10 minutes break. Please can all councillors be back seated within 10 minutes so we can resume the meeting? I would like to remind everyone to make sure their microphones are switched off during this time. Please, can the Democratic Services return to the council chambers, can the Democratic Services Officer confirm that the broadcast has resumed?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're live again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and welcome back. We now move to item 10 on the agenda, which is a presentation from the Police and Crime Commissioner and Thames Valley Police. I would like to welcome Chief Constable Jason Hogg, Superintendent Andrew Cranage, and Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Barber to the meeting. We look forward to hearing all about your work. We have allocated 30 minutes for your presentation. Please try to keep to this time if possible. Councillors were asked to submit their questions beforehand. I understand we have had sight of these. However, I will permit each political group one question arising from what is presented this evening. Please come to the lectern and present your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members, for inviting us along. I'll kick off Sorry. Should have learnt that, shouldn't I? Thank you very much for inviting us along and showing me how to use the microphone. Very nice to be here. I'm Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner. I'll kick off with a very brief introduction of the strategy and some of the key areas of work that I and my office have been dealing with at the moment before I hand over to the Chief Constable and the Superintendent, who will give you probably the much more interesting operational update, but I'll happily take any questions along with them towards the end. About Easter last year, just after the Chief Constable had taken up his new role, we jointly launched the Crime Fighters strategy, which has been the real focus for me, particularly around neighbourhood policing, in what I'm asking the force to deliver. And there's really three strands to that. One is around improving the contact with the public, particularly on the 101 emergency number. There is a lot of work to do, but some real progress has been made, opening up a victims portal that makes it easier for victims to get updates on their crimes. That's important, not just to improve the service of victims, but about 20% of calls to 101 are from victims wanting an update. So if we can provide a better service for those victims, then we can free up that capacity of calls coming through. But there is still a significant amount of work to be done on that, particularly around improving digital channels and making it easier for people to report things, particularly concerns that aren't necessarily crimes being reported, those things that just don't look right in the community. That is really key, because it's that community intelligence that the police absolutely need to have. And then really central to everything is strengthening our police neighbourhood teams. I'll come on to talk a bit about the numbers in a moment, but neighbourhood policing for me is core to everything that Thames Valley Police does. Of course, policing is a complex business. It gets more and more complex all the time. The biggest risk to your residents is probably around cybercrime and fraud. Something that the Bobby on the beat is not going to deter or detect. But nevertheless, the impact of traditional acquisitive crime, violent crime, and the concern of the public really matters. So it's absolutely vital that we rebuild those neighbourhood teams. It's important for policing by consent and important for community confidence. And that really allows us to have, or should allow us to have, a real focus on prevention. There's a lot of talk in the news about charge rates and prosecutions, and those are really important, and it's good to see some charge rates increasing in particular key areas. But actually, the focus of policing should be about preventing crime, not simply running around catching criminals after the fact. And that increase in community intelligence, the improved communication with the public and the greater presence in the community should help us to do that, to focus on known problem areas, focus on hotspot patrols, being out there, being visible, and also focusing on known offenders who will often be prolific offenders of whatever offence type it happens to be, and dealing with those repeat offenders along with other parts of the criminal justice system. And that prevention is really important. There has been a lot of success. If you look at things like burglary, which is generally for a lot of people, it's their number one concern because it's very unlikely to happen to them. But if it does, it hugely impacts on you and your family. But burglary since 2019, before the pandemic, is down by just over a third, about 36% in Thames Valley. And all neighbourhood crime overall, so that's other theft and acquisitive crime, is down by 14%. So that's really good. But clearly, if you are a victim of one of those crimes, it makes it's a little comfort that you are less likely now than you were. So it's important that we pull the whole picture picture together. In terms of those numbers, we've got more police officers in Thames Valley than we've ever had before, about 500 more than we had back in 2010. So at the end of the last financial year, which were the Home Office published figures, we had 5,034 police officers. That has continued to grow, and I invested in last year's budget to increase that number. We will hopefully, when I publish the budget in a week or so's time, you'll be able to see further increases coming through as well. And we need to continue to recruit PCSOs. One of the challenges we've had through the big national uplift of police officers has been that some of our PCSOs decided to take the step to become police officers, and that's great for them, and it's helped us to recruit more police officers, but it has left us with less PCSOs than we would like. That's not an issue of funding, that's an issue of getting people through the door and having an attractive role for people to come to. So there's a lot of work that's being done within the force to attract and retain in those roles, as well as the regular police officers. Special constables as well alongside that. We put some investment in last year. There's a new team being established to help us to recruit and retain special constables. I think the force frankly made a mistake during COVID, a well-intentioned mistake, that special constables weren't utilised during the pandemic. And I think that was done for all the absolute best intentions of not wanting to expose people to additional risk. But I think inevitably that led to a number of people who were keen to volunteer, who perhaps would have found that was their only lawful reason to leave their home at times to serve as a special constable, went off and gave their valuable volunteering time to other organisations. So we need to rebuild some of that. But special constables do and should play a really important part of the picture in Thames Valley. So over the last 12 months, or certainly by the end of this financial year, we'll have doubled the number of neighbourhood officers across the force, and that is really that's really important. So it's not just about the numbers; it's about making sure they're deployed in the right places. And I hope we can continue to go further to strengthen those neighbourhood teams again. One particular area I wanted to touch on, which I'm sure will be picked up later, is around retail crime. We've done an awful lot of work over the last 6 months or so, working with retailers large and small, and some of the umbrella organisations such as the Association of Convenience Stores about retail crime. There's definitely a lot more the police can do, and indeed are doing, have certainly stepped up in recent months, but there's definitely a lot more about the partnership with retailers. So some of the big retailers, for example, will have centralised CCTV control rooms. Tesco, Sainsbury's, I visited a number of them, talked to the teams there, and we can do an awful lot behind the scenes to link up police investigations with those retailers and the information that they've got to make sure that we identify some of those prolific offenders that will certainly be causing significant issues. And I've had those conversations with the Lexicon. We are publishing a new retail crime strategy later this month. The Lexicon have been part of that consultation, and I know Superintendent Crange's officers have been doing a fantastic job already trying to increase the presence and deal with some of those prolific offenders. I won't detain members any longer because I'm conscious of the warning about the time, and you've got a lot of slides to get through. There's a number of other things that I could talk about: CCTV, knife crime and serious violence. The leader referred to the serious violence duty that's now been imposed on all of those public bodies, which is a really important sign of us collaborating on that. And of course, the important work around cybercrime and fraud, where again prevention is key. But I'll let the Chief Constable make some progress with his presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions towards the end of the session.
Thank you, Matthew. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm delighted to spend a little bit of time with you. Do I have a clicker, or do I just... No, can I go back to the first slide? Just the first one, please. Second one, the one you just were on. I've got the clock on the wall, which is quite helpful, so I've got about 10 minutes to talk to you today. I'm going to say a little bit about the force, Thames Valley Police. I appreciate we've got some new councillors in place since the elections last year. I've been asked to cover that a little bit. Talk about some of the challenges I face, which will be very similar to some of the challenges a local authority face, and a bit about some of the changes to our force structures. And if I have time, talk about right care, right person, which is our new approach to dealing with mental health. In terms of Thames Valley Police, we are the 5th biggest police force in the UK. We have, shortly will be 8,500 officers, staff, special constables and volunteers, the largest non-metropolitan force in the country. We also host for the region the counter-terrorism unit and regional organised crime unit. We have the highest level of counter-terrorism threat in the region and organised crime threat. We have more county lines, mapped lines in the Thames Valley than any other force in the country because of our nearness to London. But also we almost touch Birmingham at the top of the force as well. And of course, it's a big, vibrant organisation. We have a lot of collaboration with Hampshire Police around our contact management and joint operations unit, things like our roads policing unit. It says there we have the more motorway network than any force in the country. We have the biggest firearms capability outside of the Met. So we're a big, quite complex, as Matthew said, organisation. Next slide, please. I've been very lucky being able to, I've taken over the organisation and been able to, in effect, recruit quite a new team. And one of the things, Thames Valley is very highly thought of nationally as a innovative, good police force that's good at fighting crime. And we're able to attract talent despite the cost of living at a senior level. But more on that later. In terms of the top team there, the two members are there you'll probably most likely have dealings with us. Any issues, concerns are Christian Bunt, who looks after local policing, so all our response and neighbour teams. And on the left there, Katie Barrow-Grint, who's our Assistant Chief Constable, who looks after criminal justice. Anything to do with vulnerability, safeguarding, which the local authority are very much involved in. In terms of our people, next slide, please. People have a view of what the police is like in terms of what type of people join the police. And the reality is very different. We're actually a very diverse organisation. We have 48% of my workforce are female. 45% of all new recruits who are police officers are female. And we've made real strides in the last 3 years in terms of being more diverse. In the past 20 years, since Stephen Lawrence was murdered, actually a bit more than 20 years, Thames Valley Police has only recruited every year 5% of its workforce from our Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. In the last 2 years, that figure's been 16 to 18%. We're the only force in the country to be recognised publicly by the independent chair of the Strategic Oversight Board for the Race Action Plan as a force that is really pushing the boundaries and in relation to genuinely wanting to be more diverse. Matthew's mentioned special constables there. We haven't got enough. I want to really invest more in volunteers, and through the Precept Rise this year, Matthew has kindly funded a new team to recruit special constables, so we're looking to increase by a further 300 special constables who have the members of the public like yourselves, but have the full powers of a police officer who we can deploy as well. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the challenges we face, the three main ones, and I think this will ring a few bells with you. Firstly, demand. Demand is ever increasing on our public services. We've had a 16% increase in 999 calls just since April this year. Recorded crimes risen by 6% just this year. And a lot of that increased demand, the cases we're dealing with are more complex, with people with vulnerabilities more than ever before. And certainly in one of our most recent inspections by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary 18 months ago, they said, we've got a workforce which is overstretched, too much work, too much demand, and feeling exhausted. The second issue for us is retention. I have no problem recruiting police officers at Thames Valley Police, and as Matthew said, more than ever before. But we do struggle with retention. We have 41 out of 43 police forces being worst for retention of our student officers. So we're doing some change to our recruitment processes and making it harder and upping the bar really in terms of the people we're looking for. But every opportunity I get to speak to government ministers, I talk about pay regularly, particularly here in Berkshire. The standard of living pressures, as you will all know, is quite significant. We do struggle to retain some of our staff, particularly in this part of the force area. They don't leave for other police forces. They tend to leave for jobs in the private sector because we train them up, and police officer skills are highly prized, and we are losing more people than I would like, and we're working hard in that context. We have a big recruitment drive, and we are being very successful. Like I've said, in terms of the target we've set by the Home Office, we've over-recruited more than any force in the country, and it's hard yards to do that. But 65% of our response officers, the officers who will, when you ring 999 101, who attend, 65% in our force have less than 2 years service. So there's significant inexperience across the organisation, which is a challenge for us. And finally, finance. We have a black hole in our budget, like probably all public sector organisations. our energy bill has gone up by £4 million this year, so we have a £20 million gap at the moment, equivalent to 400 police officers, which we've got some plans in place. And one of the things we're doing, you mentioned the force review in there, we're restructuring the organisation. We currently have 11 local command areas in effect, and we will be moving in the course of the next 18 months to 5. Why are we doing that? 2 reasons. One, help us manage demand more effectively, to be able to move resources and surge demand when there's a crime problem. But in effect, it will allow us to take our tiers of management across the organisation and make some significant management savings. In reality, at a local level, we're keeping all the police stations open. We're not moving officers around. It's more of a strategic, structural level, but happy to answer any questions for that. As part of that change, as Matthew said, we are doubling the number of neighbourhood police officers. They will arrive by April the 1st, but some of them will still be in training, and that will make a real difference, I think, in terms of visibility of officers in our communities. And most people in the room, the contact you will have with the police, I imagine, will be those neighbourhood officers. And sadly, over the last 2 or 3 years, they have been abstracted significantly, and there's an absolute commitment to visibility and problem solving at a local level. And the final point, if you move on to right car, right person, please. I will mention this because I do get a lot of questions from local authority partners from this. It's a new approach agreement being signed by the National Police Chiefs Council, of which I'm a member, the Home Office and Department of Health and Social Care in NHS England. And in effect, what it means is, in the past, we are open 24 hours a day, and we always answer the phone, not as quick as the Police and Crime and Commissioner would like. 999 calls, we do answer them in 10 seconds. 101, I checked today, 5 minutes, 12 seconds is our average time to answer 101, which is not as quick as I would like. But in effect, we do receive a lot of calls for people in mental health crisis. I think the reason why I get a lot of questions about this, there was some publicity around the Metropolitan Police who effectively said, at an arbitrary date, we're just not doing this anymore, and it's down to you, NHS, or the local authority to deal with that. We haven't done that in the Thames Valley. We have a really strong mental health strategic board, well attended by partners here in Berkshire. But from there, we have taken a different approach, and we will only deal with somebody who is in mental health crisis, in effect, if a crime has been committed or is an immediate threat to their life, or they're being threatening towards a partner organisation. That has led to a significant decrease in numbers of calls we go to. That's helping us in terms of our demand management. But in effect, not only that, it's getting a better service. Because unfortunately, when we're dealing with somebody in mental health crisis and someone's being sometimes a little bit violent, they need help and support. What they don't need is an officer there with handcuffs, a baton and CS gas. And on occasions where we have used force against somebody who is ill, or we've held them in the cells for far too long because effectively there's mental health beds not available. We have a really good relationship with local mental health partners, and we're working very closely to make further improvements in this respect. And Julian, who's head of the NHS Trust in Berkshire, who many of you will know, we meet reasonably regularly to check whether we've got this right in terms of our response. What we don't want is ever be in a situation where there's somebody from the NHS, an ambulance crew, or a local authority partner needs some help dealing with somebody who's mentally ill. They're worried about their safety or the safety of the individual, and the police don't turn up. We will turn up, but routinely we do triage those calls. And finally, in terms of it says force activity, some statistics there. A couple of questions I've had about statistics. There is a lot going well in this organisation. Over the last 12 to 18 months, our focus has been reducing homicide and knife crime, and secondly, improving our response to violence against women and girls. Why is that? In effect, there are far too many young men, and they tend to be young men from our black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, who are murdered in our streets with knife crime. We are making some real strides on this. We've been identified by the Home Office as an outlier in terms of our reduction in homicide in this year by 44%. And we are the safest force in the country when it comes to serious violence. And that is down to the relentless approach we take to people who carry knives, with a lot of leadership and support investment from Matthew as our Police and Crime Commissioner. And in terms of violence against women and girls, our recent inspection by HMIC, our inspectorate, said no force is doing more than Thames Valley Police to improve its response. We've seen a 17% increase in solving more crimes in relation to violence against women and girls, 27% increase for domestic abuse, and now a third of all my arrests by officers are for domestic abuse in this organisation, and we do have a really firm approach to making some real improvements. And I say that because we do look at what's in the media sometimes on social media, and there's often criticism of our public sector organisations, including the police. But the reality is we have a workforce in my organisation, and I meet many partners as well in the public sector, who are working incredibly hard, men and women who are working incredibly hard every day, making a difference to make their communities safer. So I am optimistic about some of the work that we're doing, and Matthew's talked about some of the improvements we are making and challenges he's giving me. One of them is, at the moment, is shoplifting. We're not as good at shoplifting retail crime as we need to be. Thankfully, I was checking the statistics before I came. You have a good LPA commander here in Andy Cranich, who's going to talk in a moment, and he is really rising to the challenge and dealing with some of the issues which certainly many of you write to me about, namely e-scooters and retail theft. And I'll pause there, but happy to answer any questions after Andy's spoken.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Andy Cranich, I'm the pleasure of being the local police area commander here across both Bracknell and Wokingham. So I have the joy of kind of two boroughs to look after. I've got some slides here. If we just go on to the next one, a couple of slides around some statistics, crime statistics and data. And now I'll go on to talk about, I think it's 4 case studies really, how we worked in partnership on some of the key areas that we've been working on through the Community Safety Partnership with the Lexicon and partners as such. So looking at the crime data here, this is from the last year, essentially the rolling 12 months, and the timeline for that is just on the bottom of the slide itself. We've seen, and this says Bracknell and Wokingham at the top, this is purely about Bracknell. We see there has been an increase of crime here down in Bracknell, just in terms of our recording, which isn't surprising. We have more people living in the Bracknell area. We have the Lexicon, which has a larger footfall of people, so it is going to probably see that increase of crime across the board. We also see that slightly in the country, an increase of crime nationally as well. So we're not too far out of kilter in relation to that. But driving down into some specific statistics here, talking about domestic abuse, the Chief just talked about kind of our relentless approach to this. And again, we've seen an increase in this, which again, around domestic abuse can be seen as a good thing, because it means people are positive and want to engage with the police and tell us about the domestic abuse that takes place that's hidden behind closed doors. So it's good that they're having that confidence to come forward. We also work closely with partners, so we have third parties telling us about incidents of domestic abuse, which we will take action on, and we'll sensitively go and approach those victims. And also we become a lot better in recording crimes. So again, when we're talking to victims of domestic abuse and they tell us about incidents that have happened in the past, we record them much better than we did before, because that gives us that idea of what is taking place, what is happening, and actually can we prosecute people in and around those previous offences. So, you know, it's one of those areas where that increase can be seen as a good thing. We also very closely work with our CSP partners in the commissioning of various services through the CSP around accommodation and around support services and that volunteer network. So there's a good wrap around all the domestic abuse victims that we have. And we also target our perpetrators through our MARAC and our MATAC processes, which is looking at specifically victims and perpetrators and putting in place activity around those. In terms of burglary, it's been mentioned earlier, it's one of those most impactful crimes. And the next slide, I won't talk too much about it. The next slide talks about how that has decreased. But if we can go back to the other slide, please, sorry. I'll come and specifically talk about that in a minute. I just want to pick up around violence and knife crime. As mentioned, it's one of our key activities we've had in the last year. And these reductions we're seeing here are on top of, I think, what was, my memory serves me, about 11% reduction last year as well. So we continue to strive to reduce that violence and knife crime. One of the key things certainly here in Bracknell and in Wokingham is that prevention side of things. And Mr. Barbara's talked about that earlier, how important prevention is, and identifying at early stage people at risk of being involved in knife crime or being victims of knife crime, and working very closely with the CSP and the serious violence programme that's taking place, working to look where we can bring in outside agencies, etc. There's some positive choices workshop we ran in Wokingham that we're looking at bringing down here into Bracknell as well, which engages with our schools community around some of the choices that they can make around not getting involved in knife crime. Sexual offences and rape. in terms of the sexual offences increased by 7%, a lot of that relates to child-on-child sharing of images. There's been a recent report that landed essentially in my inbox just before we came here today, which has been a bit of work commissioned locally within the force looking at child sexual exploitation. And a lot of that talks about that child sharing of images that takes place. And again, we don't want to criminalise young people around that. So it's very much about the education and how do we educate our children not to post things online and share that kind of imagery between themselves. And I manage a lot of this work around a number of processes I have in place on a daily basis. I look at, for our daily management meeting, I look at these crime types. And what's taking place, what do we need to do, are there any additional work we need, do we need any assistance from other departments, etc. We look at that on a daily basis. That includes hate crime as well. And then I have a series of meetings during the week where looks at all of these categories of crime and have my detectives and my neighbourhood teams and some of my response teams involved in that whole process. So we look and we identify trends and patterns that may be taking place and look how we can then use our own resources I have on my LPA or indeed going out to the wider force and getting support from other resources, the Joint Operations Unit, other CID units, specialist teams that we have available for us to tackle all these particular areas of crime. Moving just specifically then to the next slide, if I may, in terms of burglary, which is a positive story, ultimately. Ultimately, living in Bracknell is a safe place to live. I think it was alluded to already by the Chief. It's a very safe place along with Wokingham. And that's through the policing and the partnership work that takes place. And just to pick up around dwelling burglaries here and some statistics, if I can say it. If we look at the kind of trend we've got there, it was a trend from 17 up to sort of 2020, etc., where that trend was increase in burglary dwelling was increasing. That's someone burgling your home. Then we had the pandemic years, which slowed it down a little bit because people are working at home. But what we'll just say is we are on track to have a reduction in burglary offences in and around Bracknell, which is a really positive story. Again, and that has a lot to do with the approach we take around keeping on my priority crime team on top of those crimes. I know we're doing a bit of work around our attendance at burglaries, and I can give you with confidence we do attend all burglaries, which is good. So we have that personal touch. We do talk to people about that crime prevention, and then we do target those key people that are offending. Some of those are organised crime groups, some of them are kind of opportunist offenders. So again, we understand that through the various meetings we have, and we target and tackle those individuals. Moving on to some of the kind of case studies here, really. If I can go to the next slide, please. How we work on some of the key areas of concern for the communities. Drug dealing. So this is an example of where we worked on the Great Hollands and Birch Hill. It's around how we've identified the hotspots, and that comes from information that you provide and the residents of Bracknell provide that gives us a good view, good understanding of where we need to be at what time and what place and who those offenders may be. And working with that information, we can try and then tackle those particular crime hotspots. We link into kind of outreach work, working with the CSP, working with our partners to try and tackle those individuals causing and dealing those drugs. In terms of county drugs lines, I know I've been here in and around Bracknell and Wokingham for about 4 years now, and I know the feedback we've had from some people that have been part of the county drugs lines is they don't like coming to Bracknell because we tend to catch them. So it's really, really positive kind of feedback from us about the criminals don't want to come here. At the minute, I think we've got one county drugs line in and around Bracknell, which we're tackling, which is a really positive story. We've got good links here, haven't we, into the train station. The M4's just up the road, so it's kind of primed really for someone to try and come and do that. But with what we've been doing with our priority crime teams, we've really tackled that problem over the last couple of years. And as you can see on the right-hand side there, how we do that with working with our housing associations. So there's a word in there called cocooned. It should say cuckooed. Which is where someone comes in and takes over somebody's house, somebody who's vulnerable, takes over the house and then does their drug dealing from that house. So again, working with, working with our partners in Housing Association, we can get them their support. We can use closure orders to actually support them. We go in there, councillors go in there, just to prevent that that kind of offending. And again, we run operations around this on a regular basis, which hopefully you'll see on the social media when we post some of the successes we have. So again, drug dealing is just an example of how we worked in partnership. Again, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Retail theft, it's been spoken by both the Chief Constable and the PCC. It's an area of business we've really started to look into. There's a particular, There's a particular case study here, if you like, around, it was Marks and Spencer's on the Wokingham Road and Bagshot Road, where individuals were coming in on a regular basis, targeting and stealing from that shop. There were some policies with the shop that made that kind of an attractive target. So again, looking at the hotspots, the times, location, the places, we've put in taskings for our officers and identified those people who are offending. And what you find quite often with the people who commit a lot of the retail theft, they're also committing opportunist burglaries, opportunist car crime as well. So if we start tackling that small number that caused the most crime, we have some really positive impacts on the community in terms of being subject to these offences. I'll talk about some of the successes in a second, because you can see some of the work that's taking place. The other part here is around the lexicon, so just outside, it's over there, isn't it? Again, what I've done in here is work closely with the lexicon management. I've dedicated a neighbourhood officer into the actual town centre. And again, there's some challenges around that's been alluded to with abstraction that's been happening around our neighbourhood teams. That's now tailing off, which is a positive thing. We're getting our neighbourhood teams back to be out on those streets. But we've worked closely with the security there, closely with the shops around how they present the information. And Mr. Barber's talked about DISC, which is a system about sharing the information and evidence. And again, through that, we've had some real good presence in and around the lexicon. And I've done some specific work around our tutor constables and our student officers, getting them actually to go out on foot in the town. I know it's something we should be doing, but something that that's happening now on a very regular basis, and been some positive impact around that. I know a simple example of it is some officers who were doing some stop checks on an individual, literally in and around Primark area. Primark security said, that person over there has just stolen something from me. Because they're there, thank you very much, you can come to custody with us. So just some examples of how we can have some real positive impact in and around the town centre. In terms of just some numbers around that, in the last, since about November, we've charged, I think it's 5 individuals with a total of 144 offences. Just shows the scale of some people's offending. And a number of those people now reside in prison awaiting their sentencing. So some real positive impacts we're having in and around that. And that's driven by mainly by substance misuse of those particular individuals. The final part I'll mention before I stop, just conscious of having that half hour for questions at the end, is around antisocial behaviour in terms of car meets at the Meadows car park down in Sandhurst, which probably a number of you I'm looking around will be nodding around. And just again, we've taken the collective approach with our partners around that in terms of with the community safety team, and also with the particular retailers, that's the word we call retailers down in around there, the Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer's, etc., and Tesco's, I think, is down there, forgive me. And again, we've worked with them around how we can target harden the location itself. We're doing some work also around working with our other police forces, because it is exactly on the border between Hampshire, Thames Valley and Surrey. I say Sussex then, Surrey. We're working together again. How can we positively work to make it an unattractive place to take your car and show off your car? We've done a number of operations down there. We've gone out, as you can see on the slides there, a number of Section 59 warnings, which is about antisocial behaviour with your vehicles. A number have been arrested through drink driving. We're also doing some work, and keep this one secret, around some speed enforcement around some of these car meets as well. So again, we can have that impact around making it an unattractive place to be. I had a conversation with James Sunderland, the local MP, his secretary today, and he's particularly writing to the Tesco CEO around some other work that can be done, which involves investment from Tesco's to actually make it, again, a less attractive place for people to come and do their car meets. So again, it's just that collective approach across a number of different agencies that will have that impact. So they're just 4 kind of case studies of some of the work we're doing across Bracknell area. I will stop at this point for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Each group has been invited to ask up to 3 questions. Any additional questions that you may have will be dealt with in writing outside of this meeting. I really value this presentation and everybody who is so keen to ask all the questions, and those should be answered. I am just mindful of the fact that some of our councillors were under the weather today, but they have still turned up for the voting. And of course, some of them have to catch the public transport. Therefore, can I call on each group in turn to ask their questions? Labour, Councillor Bailey first, please.
Yes, thank you. First, let me say that was an impressive, passionate presentation. And I'm advised I shouldn't keep mentioning that I'm an ex-policeman, but I am. And I'm certainly encouraged by what I heard the Chief Constable say and Andy say. What I am concerned about, though, is, and we've seen lots of very impressive figures, there's nothing in there about complaints against the police. You know, how are we with complaints? Are there any patterns emerging with complaints? Does that have any impact on recruitment as to the type of individual that we're now recruiting? We've all seen the headlines in London and elsewhere, and sadly I think there have been some in Thames Valley too. I don't want to dwell on that, but I think it's something that we should be aware of and support you into making sure that, you know, the right action is taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Please.
The mic's on again.
If I cover that point, in terms of complaints and themes, I did pull all the data for Bracknell before I came in. I made very clear, I did a lot of press interviews when I became Chief Constable, made it very clear that we will be sacking more people from Thames Valley Police. I think there is a crisis of confidence in policing because of, sadly, events that mainly happen in the Metropolitan Police, but people just see the police. So we take a very robust stance. I've just dismissed somebody today, which it's a private matter, I can't mention it, but it'll be in the press shortly. We do take every opportunity when officers don't have the values the public would expect, we do get rid of them. We are getting rid of more younger officers, and there is something about our recruitment which we need to do more in terms of making sure the individuals we recruit have the resilience, a work ethic that we require. It is difficult though. It is really, really difficult to assess somebody on an interview a process with national criteria, but we are upping the bar. In terms of themes, the 2 themes we have in terms of the complaints in Bracknell, which are exactly the same as the 4 statistics. Number 1, victims of crime not being kept up to date. And secondly, officers not taking enough action when people report crimes. Use of force is really down at the bottom, 10% of complaints. In terms of our force priorities, I set 4 when I became Chief Constable. Serving victims is number 1. And there was a question in the pack about how do we know we're making a difference in terms of public confidence. And we're just about to launch some new measures, how we can measure what the public think of Thames Valley Police. And that, to me, is the number 1 measure about that public confidence. There is a real focus on measuring victim satisfaction. Victim satisfaction is up this year and continues to rise. We've got better data because rather than in the past we'd ask somebody for a text message, what do you think of the police? We survey them at different points in the process after they've called us. What do you think of your response officer? Are you being kept up to date? All the way to the court process. So we're getting better data, but more work to be done. But fundamentally, I mentioned the issue of demand. One of the problems we've had is there is too much work for our officers to deal with. Through Matthew's investment, we've now created a back office investigation team. So our workloads of our officers are down by 1/3 now, which is you speak to your local officers, they report workloads are more manageable. The vision is if workloads are more manageable, they'll have more time to investigate crime quicker and keep victims better updated. It's a real focus for me. There's some green shoots in this area. But we can share you figures if that would be appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bidwell, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm heartened by the work that the police have done in the lexicon, but I have to say that I've had a number, and I know my fellow councillors have had a number of complaints about near misses and the use of cycles, specifically e-scooters within the lexicon. And only a few months ago, a toddler narrowly escaped serious injuries, easy for me to say, isn't it? Injury from a cyclist. I'd like to understand what more the police can do to prevent those sort of accidents happening, because we don't want to be here debating a more serious accident because we didn't put the right measures in place.
If I can start, and Andy may wish to come in, I get more letters, or before Christmas I did, more letters about e-scooters than anything else. Okay? So it is a real concern, and I think in the past we slightly put our head in the sand in relation to the problem. The reason for this is we haven't got a lot of powers. There is a gap in the legislation about the response. I've been concerned about it because of the complaints I've been getting. Matthew the same, and Matthew and I agreed we needed a much more firmer approach. So we launched a new approach before Christmas. We've given training to all our frontline officers, particularly our neighbourhood teams. Before Christmas, it was all about engaging and with people who we stop, and education. A lot of people don't know, particularly young people and parents, e-scooters are illegal to ride on the streets unless it's part of a council scheme. You would need a helmet, you would need a driving licence, and you need car insurance. And you can't get insurance for an e-scooter. So they're illegal to drive on the road or in the pavement, full stop. We are now moving to an enforcement phase, and certainly when we've warned somebody once, we are taking those off the streets. And the legislation we are using is, we're particularly young people, we're seeking to prosecute parents for it's called Youth Cause Permit for No Insurance. So that's the approach we're taking. I can report. Andy was an ex-traffic officer in another life. He is passionate about this in terms of the number of scooters taken off the streets in Bracknell or people stopped is higher than any of my other 10 areas. So there is a lot of work being done, but we're early in that journey. It's fair to say more needs to be done, particularly if work can be done at a legislative aspect at a national level, but people can buy these online, which are purely illegal. But Andy, you may wish to talk about the lexicon specifically.
Thank you. Just a couple of points, especially around the lexicon itself. The fact we're having more visibility in the lexicon with police officers giving their security staff more confidence as well. And the security staff for a start, and you'll see it when you go in the lexicon soon, more signs, I think got some e-signs, or is that the right phrase, around actually you can't cycle in here, you can't e-scooter in fact it's illegal. And we're also looking at how we can use the CCTV to try and identify people and then try and follow up. If we know these individuals are, or they're a regular user, we can be in the right place at the right time to actually stop them and take the kind of action that the Chief just talked about. And then again, doing operations, we've done, since about November, we've done, I think, a couple of operations now, and we've spoken to about 14 people in total in terms of that engagement phase of it. Lots of people say, oh, I don't know, it was illegal. Funny. You know, but we have their details. We know who they are now, so if we capture them again in terms of being on the road, then we can take some enforcement action. But you'll see us doing a few more of these operations. And again, the thing we need is people reporting those kind of key areas where we get in those kind of hot spots, because they're the areas where we need to put the officers. That then has that impact of everybody being told, because people talk on social media. They're the kind of things we need to try and do. So there's kind of things we're doing locally to try and tackle that.
And just a final point, and it is quite an important point to make, is the problem is when we have a young person or anybody on an e-scooter who makes off from the police without a helmet, we cannot pursue them. Because if we do, there are 2 cases across the country where police officers are being investigated for manslaughter, for trying to do their job effectively by some children who are on e-scooters. So I'm not prepared to put my officers in a position where we do that. So they can get away from us quite easy. But we've just launched a new off-road motorcycle team who have, I don't know anything about motorbikes, but they're motorbikes who can follow e-scooters in effect. And there will be some cases where we can do so proportionally and grab them, shall we say, in a safe way. But it is tactically, it's quite a challenge for us if people try to make off.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, no, can I just add one further? I know this has been a very long answer, but it is one of those areas that has generated an awful lot of activity, as I'm sure you'd expect. I think I'm really supportive of the approach that the Chief Constable's taken. I think it's absolutely right, and we both did some comments before Christmas, particularly around the fact that, you know, an e-scooter was an attractive present for some people for Christmas, and actually trying to put people off doing that. There's definitely some work that needs to be done with the national retailers. Currys, I think, are still selling these things. Now, they're not illegal to sell. If you've got a massive area of private land, you can enjoy one safely and legally, but let's be honest, that's not what happens in most cases. But I think we also need to think beyond just e-scooters, and your question in fairness was wider than that, but most of the conversations around e-scooters, it's about the behaviour on them that is really the concern, because I would fully expect at some point in the not too distant future that e-scooters will be legalised in some form on the roads with some insurance. If you look at, we've had council provided trials, they're used in other parts of the world. There may well be some restrictions, but for many people they're an easy way of getting around, and people want the right legislation around training, around insurance, etc. But it's not just the physical machine that's the issue, it's the driver-rider behaviour, because often the behaviour and the riding that is complained about would be just as dangerous if it was done by someone on a push bike or an e-bike, whether it's powered or not. It's the behaviour that is the issue. So that's why this is so important. It's not, as some people see, a persecution on something just so the government can tax you through some other route. It's about keeping pedestrians particularly safe.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wright, and may I request, please, keep the questions and answer brief, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. My question is just a very brief one on the force activity, 1st of April to the 30th of September. It would just be useful to know the actual numbers rather than the increase or decrease, but obviously it would be nice if you could supply it, not now, but later on. Thank you very much.
Well, just that point. Look, I want you as local councillors to have confidence in Thames Valley Police. So if there are gaps or there's data information you want, just contact us. Chief Constable at Thames Valley Police. You'll find me on the internet, and preferably in not every day, but if there's a list of things you're interested in, let us know. We have data coming out of our ears, and that matter of reporting to the Home Office. So getting data, and particularly getting data at a local level, is not difficult for us at all. So please, but we will respond to that and write to you with those numbers. But anything else you need, please just get in touch.
Thank you
very much.
Can I just cheekily ask also if you could add in hate crime as well, please, to those statistics?
Of course, we've got before we got your questions. So we've got those statistics, so we can share those with the minutes of this meeting. Yeah.
Thank you very much. In the interest of fairness, I am not going to allow any other Labour councillor to ask questions from the floor because 3 questions have already been asked. I'll swiftly move on to my Conservative colleagues. Councillor McLean, please.
Actually, Madam Mayor, it's me, Tony Virgo, if I may ask the question.
Okay.
I'd like to thank the police, first of all, for these quite comprehensive and the details as well. My question really, because Bracknell is made up of lots of villages, not necessarily all in the town centre, but they're expanding on the outskirts. And I suppose there seems to be an increase of unsocial behaviour in the borough. And I'm talking about smaller things, but they grow into bigger things, don't they? Graffiti, bad parking, as we've all seen, e-scooters we've talked about, drugs, etc. Will the increase in police numbers see the residents and certainly the councillors see more police on the streets? I know this is a frivolous point, but Dixon of Dock Green is actually repeated this Saturday, actually. And of course, the evidence of that was that the policeman is looking at what's going on in the street. And sometimes a lot of people miss that. I wonder what your thoughts are.
So Andy may want to talk about in some detail, but in general terms, interestingly enough, there is no evidence. If you increase the number of police officers in itself, it doesn't drive down crime. It can do. It depends on what you do with them. And we've some real successes recently, particularly in our rural crime teams, about just having a small number of officers dedicated to a particular task. What we do know, what the research says, is people feel safer. People feel safer when they see the police. There was an article in a national paper recently, which I live in an area which has the lowest level of solved burglary in the country, and they went to the village I live in, and they went and spoke to all the shopkeepers. None of them mentioned solving crime. They just said, "We just want to see the police." And that does make people feel safe where they live. There's an absolute commitment. We are doubling the number of neighbourhood police officers on the streets, and the approach we're taking will be saying to the local commander, rather than doing it from headquarters, it'll be, there's the extra officers, Andy, where can you put them? Where can you put them to have the most impact? Where's the greatest need in your borough? But you may want to talk a little bit about that, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing exactly that. Just restructuring, because I've got Bracknell and Wokingham. I've got a pool of neighbour police officers. I've got some vacancies at the minute that we're going through a process of recruiting into. That's both for PCSOs and for police officers. For Bracknell, it's 4 officers we're kind of missing, if you like, or vacancies. We've had the abstractions over the last year or so around having our neighbourhood officers having to cover the gaps of the student officers when they go and do their protected learning. That's had an impact. So it hasn't been where it needs to be. My vision is that we have an identifiable officer in each of the parishes wards, if you're correct terminology, that is the go-to person for their community. So they're seen and they're visible. But again, part of that is around targeting the right locations and places and get that information and intelligence flow into us to support all the stuff I talked about earlier around where is their drug dealing, where is their antisocial behaviour, where is their car crime, whatever it might be that's particular to that area. Because even within Bracknell, you have your own nuances around the different locations themselves. So it's about getting back to some of that grassroots stuff, if you like, around knowing who that neighbourhood person is. So again, that's my kind of vision in the next sort of when we change this new structure. And indeed, I'm doing it now, quite frankly, up until we move. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Thank you very much. Would any of the Conservative councillors would like to ask any question from the floor? No? Thank you very much. So now I'll come to the Lib Dems, please. Councillor Forrester, please.
I think you may have answered some of this already, so I'll just sort of zone in. The first question is, as Chief Constable, are you satisfied in the public confidence that the residents of the Thames Valley give to you? And you've mentioned some of how you measure it. I'd just be interested just to get a view today where your sort of warning arrow is. The third one, so you can answer the problem all together, is about right care, right person. And just on a very local level, your engagement with Berkshire Healthcare Trust, are you confident collectively that they can meet the new demands that the change policy will apply to them? And then one for Mr Barber on ends and ways and means, really, to provide the resources that you need to meet the policing plan and the resident expectation.
What was the first? Give me the first one again, sorry.
First one is, where are you today on public confidence?
Yeah.
You've already mentioned some measuring.
Yeah. Right.
Second one is right care, right person, Berkshire Healthcare Trust. Collectively, are you confident that they've got what they need? And the third one is Mr Barber, ways and means to meet the policing plan and residents' expectations. His confidence in that.
So the confidence issue. So there's something called the Crime Survey of England and Wales. It used to be called the British Crime Survey. You can look it up online. I was googling before I came here actually how long it's been going. It's been going for decades. It's the most accurate statistical way of measuring crime levels across the UK. There is a confidence question now, how confident you are in the local police. Thames Valley Police have consistently over a number of years, even before I came working here, has higher level of satisfaction than the national average, much higher. The problem is we don't have any other data at the moment. And the vision of Thames Valley Police, which I set when I became chief, is to be an excellent police force trusted by all our communities. And at the moment, we don't have any way of measuring that. So we have invested jointly with the PCC's office, effectively buying some data from the private sector. That's a much cheaper and efficient way who do route like Ipsos, Mori, Gallup, etc., to get some baseline data of what the communities in Thames Valley think of the police. Where I'd like to go next, and we're speaking to some companies at the moment, and there is a cost to this, but there are one bit of good practice, which is it comes from London, is the Mayor's Office in London have a private company which can live time get confidence levels in different communities. So it might say the Asian community in Reading has a gap in terms of their confidence comparison to Thames Valley. So what I want to know is which of the communities or areas of Thames Valley where the confidence is lower, baseline it, and then I'll be saying to the local commander, we've got a confidence problem in that community, in that estate, and then what activity can we do? So in my vision, we baseline it, and we will see improvements in confidence from the activities of the police in due course. We can't measure it yet, and it will take an investment, but we've got that baseline data now. In terms of right care, right person, yes, Julian Ems, who is the it's chief exec of the Berkshire Healthcare Trust. He's the most engaged chief exec in terms of right care, right person. And I think I'm meeting with him shortly, meet with him formally at a strategic level to talk about how's it all working, any issues, any concerns. He hasn't fed anything back to me at the moment so far, so it seems to be working pretty well. But Julian's got a line to me if there are any problems.
Thank you. If I can just briefly go back and touch on the confidence piece as well, because I think I would agree with the points that the Chief has made about the need to get the data and the work that's ongoing to do that. I think one of the challenges, and local governments feels the same as well, but particularly in policing, is around how perception and reality don't always match. Now, in terms of confidence, perception matters, frankly. But if you take one particular issue, which has been in the media of late around attendance at burglary. So there was actually some news on this earlier in last year, and there was some stuff over Christmas as well about the National Police Chiefs Council making an announcement that police would attend every burglary. Now, as you've heard from Superintendent Cranage, that happens already in Bracknell. The police will attend every burglary. That's always been the policy in Thames Valley. That doesn't mean there won't be the odd case where someone can say that hasn't happened, but the policy has always been to attend, and in Bracknell at the moment, that is certainly what's being achieved. But, of course, when there's a national headline of the police will now attend every burglary, the natural assumption of everybody is, oh, you mean they weren't attending every burglary? And there was a reality that in other forces, the Met particularly, I think attendance at burglaries was down to 50%. Now, of course, as you've seen from the statistics, very few people, thankfully, in Bracknell in Thames Valley, relatively speaking, are victims of burglary. But if you've picked up your newspaper and seen a story about police not attending burglaries, and you're asked about your confidence in policing, that's going to impact your confidence in policing, even though you haven't been a victim of that crime. And if you had been, the police would probably meet your expectations by attending. Now, that's not to make an excuse about confidence. That's just a reality that I think we need to deal with. And that's not to say that doesn't matter, because actually it's that perception arguably matters more than anything. So we have to deal with that, because the reality is most people in Bracknell, most people in Thames Valley will not be victims of crime. Most people will hopefully not have to have any dealings with any of the Chief Constable's police officers, because their lives will carry on unaffected by criminality. But their perception of crime will be flavoured not just by what Andy and his officers do here locally, but by some of that wider issues. In terms of the resources and the numbers. Yeah, it's fair to say that we've got significant growth at the moment. There are some challenges around future savings that need to be made, but when we publish the budget next week, you'll see the growth in the forces budget this coming year will be around £50 million. So we are investing, and that's a mixture of what will come from local taxpayers through the precept and what will come from the Home Office. Clearly, I would always like to have more, but my two constant asks of the Home Office, which I nag the succession of Home Secretaries and Policing Ministers that we've had in recent years on, are two things. Firstly, in the biggest context, is the funding formula. So it's not just about the totality of money going into policing. Of course, we'd like that to rise, but it's actually how that's divided up across police forces. At the moment, the formula that was implemented in the sort of late 90s, I think it was, tends to favour the larger metropolitan areas and areas with higher crime. Now, at one level, you can sort of understand that, but it does also reward failings, where you've got areas like Thames Valley, which are, relatively speaking, lower crime areas. We don't do as well per head of population as some other areas, particularly in the north of England. So that's the generality. I would like a fairer allocation of that. The Home Office have done a lot of work on the funding formula. I'm as confident as I can be that if that were to be implemented, Thames Valley would benefit. The health warning that comes with that is just about everybody I talk to says that if only we had a better funding formula, we would be better off wherever you happen to be. And that isn't mathematically possible. Someone must lose out. So there is always a risk that someone loses in that, but I think we should absolutely be a winner. The latest on that is I understand the Home Office have done their work with it. The decision to go out to consultation is with the Treasury, and I'll continue to lobby government to consult on the first stage of that review. The secondary specific one, and the Chief Constable touched on it a little bit around pay. There's obviously the global where police officer pay is set, but in Thames Valley we have the opportunity to pay police officers an additional South East allowance. Now, a couple of years ago, when Jason was deputy under his predecessor, we jointly agreed to increase the amount we pay our officers in Thames Valley to the maximum that's allowed within the South East allowance. I think that's £3,000 over and above the national pay. But it's not just about the cash, it's about the fact we aren't able to pay anymore. So yes, I would clearly like the cash from the Home Office to pay our officers more, but at the moment, even if we found the money somewhere, we're not able to pay any more because we pay at the national rate the police officers are paid, and we pay to the maximum of the South East allowance. So it's flexibility as well as cash that I would like to see. But of course, the reality is, if we don't get additional funding from the Home Office for that pay, that means less better paid police officers than more police officers. The public generally want to see more. So I would like to see that growth in salaries paid for directly by the Home Office.
Thank you very much for that. I would like to take the liberty to inform everyone that I had approached the Green Group and they said they didn't have any question at this present time. With that, I thank all the officers who have given their valuable time, and I speak for this whole chamber. Thank you so much. That has been thorough. I'm sure this dialogue and this collaboration will continue, and we will get all the answers that we have put forward to you. And I'm sure that we will see you again at some point. Thank you very much, gentlemen. With that, I now declare this meeting closed.